What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Great show lined up for you today. I want to talk about wide receiver Alec Pierce, who could be a real legit option for Green Bay on day 2. But before I get there, I want to talk a little bit about the DeVante Parker trade. Of course, we get the news on Saturday that DeVante Parker was traded to the Patriots, not the Packers. You get that instant notification and it says PA, and sometimes it's Panthers, sometimes it's Patriots. Usually it's not Packers, but gives you that just split second of excitement. And then all of a sudden you realize, all right, he's not actually going to be a Packer. He's going to be a Patriot. But he gets traded with a 5th round pick to the Patriots for a 3rd round pick. And as I mentioned on Twitter, if you're following me there, this is not a deal that I had a ton of interest in for Green Bay. DeVante Parker is a nice wide receiver. I don't really think there's much debating that. I do think he will very much add to New England's wide receiver core, and I think he's a nice pickup for them. No two ways about it. But I do think this is a little bit rich. Now, I get that they're getting back a 5th round pick, but I'm a huge believer in top 100 draft picks and that you really want to maximize the value of those first 2 days. And then everything after that is a bit more of a crapshoot. I am well aware that Green Bay has done very well with 4th, 5th, 6th round picks, and 3rd round picks have been an unmitigated nightmare for them. So you might be thinking, Andy, I would probably rather have the 5th round pick and Brian Gutekunst operating in that range rather than the 3rd round where they've just been beyond abysmal for close to a decade. And I certainly understand that. But as I talk to you guys all the time when it comes to transactions, everything has to be considered and everything is a trade-off. So it's not just DeVante Parker and a 5th round pick for a 3rd round pick. It is DeVante Parker and his salary cap, $12 million over 2 seasons, 6.04 million this season for a 3rd round pick in exchange. And New England is picking up the salary this season. It's, basically, again, 2-year, $12 million, not guaranteed. However, there are wide receivers out there on the free agent market that I think you could get for at or around or maybe even below that cost. Take, for example, Sammy Watkins. Maybe I'm off on this, but I would assume that at worst you could probably get Sammy Watkins for 2 years, $12 million. And I would think maybe that it could be even less than that, but it's probably somewhere in the realm. And I would think that Watkins is probably signing a 1-year deal, not a 2-year deal. But I think it's probably somewhere in that realm, if not less. Now, you might be thinking, Andy, if I had my choice between DeVante Parker or Sammy Watkins, I'm choosing DeVante Parker. Okay, I'm certainly not going to argue that against you, and I think you are right for making that that argument. And maybe it's close. Maybe some of you view Watkins better, some of you view Parker better. I think you can, again, certainly make the argument, and probably I'm a little bit more on the Parker side there. But again, everything's a trade-off, right? So even if it's apples to apples in cost, would you rather have Sammy Watkins in your 3rd round pick or DeVante Parker in a 5th round pick? And if it's me, again, the way I value those top 100 draft picks, I much more would rather have Sammy Watkins at what I think is probably a cheaper deal and keep my 3rd round pick rather than getting Parker in a 5th round pick. So I don't hate this deal. And again, even if you want not Sammy Watkins, like using that $6 million this season towards other players, I think you can find a better value for that $6 million in a 3rd round pick than for DeVante Parker. Don't hate the trade for New England. Understand it. I like the trade for Miami. I think getting, again, another top 100 pick at their disposal. If you're New England, you're just moving down from like the middle to late 3rd to the early 5th. It's not that exorbitant of a cost. And again, you're getting a player that you also probably had to pay a little bit of a premium because you traded within the division. Again, I think New England it's understandable why they wanted to make this deal, but don't hate it for Green Bay. And if you remember back, for anyone who listened to my conversation with Mike Wall before I went on vacation, if not, I definitely recommend checking out that episode. But Mike and I had a great conversation as a piece of that episode about going over the disparity between the upper echelon of talent in the NFL and then the next tier. There seems to be a very wide gap between the great players and the good players. And then the good players to like the average players, it's not that much of a gap. They're in the similar realm. And what I would say here when it comes to DeVante Parker is you are getting one of those solid to good players. And that's not a bad thing. You want solid to good players on your team. However, he is not in that upper echelon of players. And what I would argue here is that the difference in win totals, or like the difference that DeVante Parker is going to bring to your team as to how much you're going to win in a season or get you over the hump to win a Super Bowl, isn't that great. Like even the difference between a DeVante Parker and an Allen Lazard as a outside wide receiver and what they're actually going to help you from a win standpoint is very, very minimal. And I, again, put DeVante Parker very much in that good to solid range as a wide receiver. And why I don't like giving up the third round pick in this situation is these are lottery tickets, and what you're trying to do specifically with those top 100 picks are not find the good to solid players. You're hoping that with those picks, you can hit on somebody that's going to hit in that upper echelon. And again, full understanding that it's probably more likely that that third round pick is another Oren Burks than it's at an upper echelon star in this league. But you want to have those swings at the plate when it comes to top 100 picks to try to identify those players that could potentially become premium players in this league. And if getting a DeVante Parker, a average to good wide receiver, costs you one of those opportunities, as a GM, you have to like literally think of that cost in that equation. So when it comes to the final decision and when it comes down to it, how I'm looking at this is my top 100 pick is more valuable, and the cash that I have, $6 million this year, $12 million over 2 years, is more valuable as a combined asset than DeVante Parker and a fifth round pick. You might feel otherwise, and that's totally fine. I think it's close, and I think it's a great conversation, but I know some people will immediately jump to the conclusion of like, oh, Green Bay never does these deals, and why didn't they give up just a third round pick for DeVante Parker and a fifth? I just don't think it's that easy, and I think you have to weigh in all of the things I just mentioned, top 100 pick, and again, the money that you have to spend on free agents that you didn't use on DeVante Parker. I think there's a better opportunity to increase and improve your roster with those assets rather than just bringing in DeVante Parker. So enough about that. That's my take on the Parker trade. Let's get to our main event today, and that is wide receiver Alec Pierce, who is, again, in my opinion, a day two prospect in this draft and a very, very firm option for the Packers, probably in round two. But maybe if they move back in round two or up in round three, you could have him at the beginning of the third round. But I believe that this is probably a second round pick in Alec Pierce. Give you a little bit of a background on him. He is a senior out of Cincinnati. Again, wide receiver, 6'3", 211 pounds. He will turn 22 in May, so a month from now. We talked about RAS scores yesterday. Again, relative athletic scores, which means you're basically comparing these players to players throughout draft, like the last 2 decades at their same position. Alec Pierce is a 98th percentile athlete at wide receiver. He didn't do the bench press, but overall, an incredible athlete, great size, 97th percentile in the vertical, 94th percentile in the broad jump, 92nd percentile in the 40-yard dash, 99th percentile in the 10-yard split. He had an average short shuttle and was only in the 36th percentile for his 3-cone, which means some of his agility probably a little bit below average. Again, didn't do the bench press, but overall, an incredible athlete. If you're looking at his stats from this past season, 52 catches, 884 yards, a 17-yard average, which is, of course, really good, and 8 touchdowns on the year. So that's a little bit of background on Pierce. Let's get into his positives and what he could potentially bring to the table for the Green Bay Packers, especially if he reaches his ceiling and his upside sooner rather than later. The first thing is that his speed, that 4.41 40 speed, it translates to the tape. Go and watch his Notre Dame tape and watch him get to the second level on the corner, especially stacking the corner and using that speed to separate and gain easy separation on the second level to create explosive plays down the field. That's one of my favorite aspects of his game, is his ability to stack corners and then separate and then use his frame, that 6'2 frame, and go up and get the ball. It is something that he does very, very well and is what you're hoping he's going to do at the next level. Now, with that ability to stack receivers, there's the old adage, if you're even, you're leaving. And that's what I see on Pierce's tape. If he is even with the defender, if you're the quarterback, you can lead him ahead and you know that he's going to use that 4.4 40 speed to separate, get clearance from the defender, and go up and make a play with his size. And again, with that 6'3" size, he has a great catch radius, and he uses that to pluck the ball out of the air. Strong hands at the point of attack. He does have smaller hands, which we'll get to in a moment, but he has great body control, and again, has the ability to go up, get the ball, high point, use that body control to work off defenders, and he doesn't have any real fear of defenders around him. You don't see him panic or get nervous when there's a bunch of congestion, or traffic. You see him have the control and the wherewithal to focus on the ball, go up, get it, come down with it, and even through contact if need be. So again, when you have a guy that has that sort of range from a 4.4 40 standpoint with 6'3" size, the ability to concentrate, go up and get the ball, you're talking about a player who has some really rare traits and again has the ability to be a weapon on the outside. Love the fact that he's smooth at the catch point. So again, as I mentioned earlier, traffic doesn't seem to bother him. There's multiple catches on tape where he is between a corner and a safety, whether it be in a cover 2 hole or whether it be two players converging at the same point. Either way, he goes up, gets the football, comes down with it, and it's smooth, it's controlled, it looks easy to him. There's no panic. There's no, feeling like, he has to ward off a defender. It's just pure concentration on the football, going up, getting the ball, coming down with it, and securing the ball and making a play, which again, of course, is what you want to see from your wide receiver. Now, the next few traits are flashes that he shows. And what you're hoping are that these flashes turn into consistencies as he becomes a professional and continues to work on his craft at the NFL level. He flashes really clean breaks at the top of his route. I am talking clean, crisp, 45-degree angle, like just really incredible breaks. What are this 45, 90-degree angle? Like he does all of it. He does all of it very well, but he does it in flashes. There's route running nuances that he still needs to get better at, cutting off some of his routes, working towards if a defender is attached to him, like those breaks aren't quite as clean. Those are things that you want to see him clean up. But man, there are times where he has clean breaks that just look like they're already at a professional level. And you love to see that out of a receiver with that type of traits. He also flashes great hand usage throughout the course of the route. Go back and watch his Senior Bowl tape, especially the Senior Bowl practices. And you can see him use leverage, which I'm going to get to in just a second, but also use his hands throughout the route to keep the defender's hands at bay so he can stay clean and work through those breaks and get to his spots on the field without the defender being such a nuisance to him as he's working through his route. So he's flashing those clean breaks. He's flashing great hand usage. And again, he's flashing the ability to use leverage to his advantage, leaning on the defender, then gaining separation, using those crisp breaks to get a clean break and gain separation. And as you sort of break this all down together, and what you're hoping for at the NFL level is you've got this 6'3" wide receiver with 4.4 40 speed that's already starting to flash these professional attributes, leverage, route running, clean breaks, and hand usage throughout the route. If all of a sudden he puts all of that together, look the heck out, because you have the makings of a really talented, really solid wide receiver. And again, the other thing that he shows flashes of is the ability to run precision routes. His route tree is limited, which we'll get to in the negatives in just a second. But again, as you're watching him go through his routes, you see him snap off and break routes at a very consistent level. There's one specific play where he's running an out route, and his ability to get to his spot, it's like a 5-yard out, but the corner is playing him with outside leverage, and he is beating that corner to his spot. Even though the corner's playing him specifically for that route, he's giving enough nuance in that route and getting to his spot, and he's still coming open, catches a quick 5-yard out, even though the defender's playing to stop that route in specific. And in particular, those are the traits that you love to see as a receiver. It doesn't matter, right? I don't care if you're guarding me, like that's a very Davante Adams-esque thing. I don't care if you're guarding me not to get to that spot and your one goal in life is to not let me get to that spot. I'm going to get to that spot anyway and make you look foolish. He's shown that on tape. And again, that's very exciting from a trait standpoint. I also love the fact that he has the size and the toughness to work the middle of the field. A lot of times as you get these, very speed wide receivers who have the ability to work on the outside, a lot of those guys don't like working the middle of the field. This is not a player who has a fear over the middle. You will see him again, as I talked about on the outside, have the ability to go up, get the football, brace through contact, and come down and not have the fear to work over the middle. NFL is, of course, not the same that it once was, with safeties be able to just blast you and take your head off over the middle, thankfully. So it's not quite as scary as it once was, but there are wide receivers, especially those small. Think of like a Deshaun Jackson, right? Deshaun Jackson doesn't want to work over the middle, especially at age 35. He's an outside wide receiver that wants to get deep down the field. Those speed, deep wide receivers don't always love working that middle. He has no fear of it. And that's something that, again, if you're looking for a complete wide receiver, as time goes on, you want those sort of traits. I also love the fact that he's worked all over at wide receiver, XYZ, left, right, slot. He's worked all of it. So you can see him, again, transition into an NFL offense where you don't just want to pigeonhole a receiver at one spot. Matt LaFleur loves using his wide receivers everywhere. That's something that he can bring to the table relatively quickly because he's played all over the place in college. So many times in college, you'll see a receiver just play in one spot and try to make his living in that one spot. The fact that Pierce has played left, right, slot gives him that versatility from day one to come in and start learning all those different positions. Love the fact that he shows both an inside and an outside release. When he's stacked at the line of scrimmage, so many receivers at the college level are only going to have a comfortability releasing to one side, or they're going to favor one side. You see him release inside, you see him release outside, and you also see him use those to his advantage where he will fake the release to the outside and then cut back. There's a play where he just absolutely, I think it was against Alabama, actually, if I'm remembering correctly, where he's going for that outside release and then he just nukes him on a slant to the inside. The ball was tipped at the line of scrimmage, but absolutely annihilates that corner with a slant route. Should have been, or was, wide open for a touchdown, but the ball got tipped at the line of scrimmage. So again, showing those high-end traits and showing the ability to separate using those releases at the line of scrimmage. Another thing that we talk about a little bit more with edge rushers and defenders is ankle flexion, but he actually shows that at wide receiver. Now, I know his 3-cone, his short shuttle weren't great, but he showed the ability to sort of flex his ankles and get to the outside and use that to his advantage. When I talked earlier about those 90-degree angles, being able to have that footwork and flex on your ankles and get to your spots is something that can really be to your advantage. And again, that is something that Pierce has shown on tape. In addition, this isn't something that shows up on tape, but he was a first-team academic All-American. And again, that usually just shows that he's very smart and has the ability to pick up things very quickly. And as Green Bay isn't an all-in sort of season, they don't have 3 years for this wide receiver to develop, right? They need somebody who can come in and learn not only Matt LaFleur's offense, but Aaron Rodgers' checks and everything at the line of scrimmage as well. As MVS has stated, and as I've talked about numerous times in the past, Green Bay basically has two offenses, Aaron Rodgers' offense and Matt LaFleur's offense. That is a ton for a rookie to grasp. If somebody is a academic All-American, you're hoping that they're going to be able to maybe, just maybe, pick some of that stuff up a little bit quicker and maybe be able to contribute sooner rather than later as Green Bay is trying to win over the course of these next couple seasons. And again, you put together the total package, the flashes of technique that he's putting, that like you can see him already really starting to work on his craft with the high-end athletic profile, 6'3", 4'4", 40, smarts of an academic All-American. You can start putting together the pieces of like, all right, there's not much that he is missing. If he can put all of this together, he has the ability to be a really complete wide receiver in the NFL. And I think he can be a better NFL wide receiver even than what he ever showed at the college level. Speaking of which, let's get to his negatives. And I think the biggest thing that you have to bring up here with his negatives is his production. Now, this last season, 52 catches, 884 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That's a really nice season. The season prior, 17 catches, 315 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Prior to that, 37 catches, 652, and 2 touchdowns. And he did absolutely nothing as a true freshman. He did not redshirt, so nothing as a freshman. 37 catches, 17 catches, 52 catches. You put it all together, and in 4 seasons at Cincinnati, 106 catches, 1,851 yards, and 13 touchdowns. Compare that to Jameson Williams, who this season alone, 79 catches, 1,572 yards, and 15 touchdowns just this year. So less than 30 receptions less than 300 yards less, and 2 more touchdowns just this season for Jameson Williams than what Pierce had in his entire time at the University of Cincinnati. So that production overall is not that great. And what you generally want to see is these high-end wide receivers producing from day one. We talked about it on yesterday's episode with Garrett Wilson and him coming in and having the ability, even as a true freshman, to come in and compete. It took Pierce some time, and even his highest season this past year as a senior at Cincinnati was 52, 884, and 8 touchdowns. So the production isn't great, and again, pales in comparison basically to what Jameson Williams did in almost one season in and of itself. Even maybe a bigger red flag here is that in his 2 playoff games against Alabama this season and against Georgia last season, Alabama this year, 2 catches, 17 yards. Georgia last year, 3 catches, 28 yards. Now, it was very clear that Alabama was working to limit him as he was playing in that game. I didn't get as great of a feel for Georgia if they were specifically trying to take him out of the game and limit him. But 5 catches for 45 yards in 2 playoff games, that is not good enough. And as a go-to wide receiver, you've got to find a way to make a bigger impact in arguably the 2 biggest games of your career. Now, Kevin Cole from Pro Football Focus also puts this into perspective, and I think this is really worth mentioning here. Cole notes that deep threats without strong overall production have typically been overdrafted in the past, and some players who he sees as very similar to this profile: Chris Conley, Chad Jackson, Justin Hunter, Steve Smith, the USC, not the shorter Carolina Panthers Steve Smith, the New York Giants Steve Smith, Derek Hagan, Cody Latimer, Anthony Gonzalez, Aurelius Ben, DJ Shark, and Brashard Perryman. Not a great list of wide receivers. All were overdrafted in some capacity and all had similar traits, high-end athletic speed traits without the production in college. And it's really tough because there is an analytical standpoint to this that says beware in huge red flashing lights of this profile wide receiver. If they're not breaking out at an early age, if they're not putting up huge production, and they have this sort of profile, they haven't turned out great at the NFL. At the same token, you want to trust your eye. There's always people who are going to break the mold, right? And you always want to be able to trust your scouting instincts to say, hey, like, this guy has all the traits that we're looking for. Just because he didn't put up production at Cincinnati doesn't mean that he can't be a better NFL wide receiver. So you want to note it. And you want to be cognizant of it, but you don't want it to be the be-all, end-all either. You don't scout the jersey. You don't scout just the production. You scout the player. I mean, Josh Allen at quarterback's a great example, right? Allen at Wyoming, was not a great quarterback, was not all put together, had all of the traits you would possibly want, right? So, you can't just go off of the jersey that they wear. You can't just go off the production score, their breakout age. You have to scout the guy. You look at the scout, you look at the tape and the scouting traits and what he could become, you fall in love with it, but the production very much does leave something to be desired. Now, that's not this only negatives either. He will struggle with more physical defenders and physicality at the point of attack. His releases off of press coverage are not great. He will get leaned on and he will struggle to separate in those specific situations. So he needs to get stronger at the point of attack. He needs to better understand coverages. There will be times where he runs into coverage and needs to do a better job of IDing what the defense is trying to do and figuring out a better plan of attack against that. He also worked in a little bit of a crackerjack offense at University of Cincinnati. So that transition from a spread, 2 or 3 routes here or there offense to a NFL style Matt LaFleur offense could definitely take some transition. His route tree is not super developed, and his change of direction, agility, run after the catch are all things that he's going to have to continue to work on as well. He's never going to be that Cooper Kupp, guy who's just breaking in and out of routes and being that slot type wide receiver. He is an outside speed guy, and again, has the ability to develop into a better route runner and can do a lot of different things, but his agility, run after the catch, those sort of things I think are always going to be somewhat of a question mark. And then as mentioned earlier, he does have smallish hands as well, has not seemed to affect him at the college level, but again, if you're looking at high-end traits, you want those bigger hands so they can go pluck the ball out of the air. He's had no issue with that, but it's at least noteworthy as well. So what am I looking at here? I'm looking at a guy who has the traits to develop into a true number one receiver while in the interim helping out as an outside potential deep threat and can be used in a variety of different ways in Matt LaFleur's offense, probably as a package player to begin with. I do believe he has the ability to be a better NFL player than he was in college, and with a bit more development, a bit more time in the weight room, and just a guy who masters his craft, again, with that size, that athleticism, the smarts, and already showing how he's starting to master his craft in college, you get the idea of the top end type of player that he could potentially become. Question mark is special teams. Can he come in and make a special teams impact right away? You got to think that Green Bay is going to bring in a top tier wide receiver in some capacity. Allen Lazard can help a little bit on special teams. Cobb's not helping there. Amari Rodgers isn't helping as like a gunner or a blocker. He might do a little bit of returning. You need these guys to be able to help on special teams. I think he will. As a freshman, they actually worked him out as a linebacker as well. They were going between linebacker and wide receiver. He has that type of build. He has those sort of instincts. So if he can use that to his advantage, he may be able to come in and be an impact player on special teams as well. And yes, I do think he does have a little bit of Jordy Nelson to his game. Now, that is high praise, and I don't think you can just pencil him in and say, like, he's going to be the next Jordy Nelson. And I'm not just saying that because they're two white wide receivers. I promise you that. But there is legitimately some Jordy Nelson to his game, and I do think that this is going to be a player that Green Bay really likes at wide receiver, and very much is in play for the Packers in the second round. Do not be surprised and do not be shocked if with that second round pick, if Green Bay is targeting Alec Pierce, or maybe they move down a little bit and get him, or maybe they fall in love with him and take him with their first second round pick. None of those things would surprise me, but I do believe that Alec Pierce will very much be in play for the Packers on day 2 of the NFL draft. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. I always appreciate it. I'll be right back here with an all new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.